Henry Allingham.
Henry Allingham.
He passed away yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone who doesn't know, he was 113 years old when he died. Was he? Do you know if he was actually the last World War I veteran?
No, he's not. I think Harry Patch is. He's the last. Is he the last? Did Harry Patch recently pass away? No, he was the last one of two. He's the oldest man, and Harry Patch is still alive. And in fact, Richard Emden, a terrific British author and sort of expert on the social history of World War I, wrote a book called The Last Tommy, which was about not Henry but Harry Patch. Harry Patch was an infantryman, so he
was on the field.
Ground. Yeah,
yes.
And that's the thing about these two men. They really were World War I veterans. They weren't World War I era veterans.
Yes.
They were there.
He survived with their shrapnel.
Yes, and their memories.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you ever meet Henry Allingham?
No, I never met him, and I've never met any of those old Tommies. But I remember, men of that generation from when I was a child. I mean, not only my grandfather, but there were these two gentlemen that lived not far from us. They were elderly gentlemen. They were brothers. And they used to see them walking along. There's a famous painting by Sargent, and it's of literally blinded soldiers marching along, one hand on the shoulder of the one man in front, so that they could feel their way. Someone is leading them along, which is how they got them off the field when they had been blinded.
Yeah.
And these two old men had been blinded, but when I say blinded, they didn't have the eyes in their sockets. Their eyes, and they'd probably both been in the same battle, and that's how they walked along. The younger one with his hand on the shoulder of his older brother, and they walked down to the shops and they walked back again.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was a little girl, and I remember they used to love it if I sang for them.
I just wanted to touch on a few things about your Maisie Dobbs series, which is clearly, completely suffused with sort of the memories and experiences, and as you put it, the wounds of the Great War to end all wars, World War I. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome that we call PTSD now, but then I felt like they had much sort of kinder, gentler names.
Shell shock, neurasthenia, war neuroses, just a whole gamut of them.
What was Soldier's Heart?
That actually has its origins in the Civil War. And there are certain psychologists that will say it was a psychosomatic condition that just ran through the men who were in the trenches, because that's really was the genesis of trench warfare. Was modern trench warfare was in the American Civil War, and literally it was almost like an arrhythmia, which can be brought on by shock. But what they started to use was the term soldier's heart for any condition that was clearly born of warfare, but where you didn't have a visible wound, a gash to the leg, an arm missing, a leg missing, something like that. And it was, so they called it soldier's heart, and it became a term that was, as I say, used for all manner of things. Just like shell shock, there are different types of war neuroses and so on. And officers tended to suffer differently than the men, interestingly enough.
That is interesting.
It is very interesting. Imagine how we feel in a stressful situation. Even if it's a split second, you're walking along the street and you hear the screech of tires behind you. Boom! The adrenaline just shoots through you, and you are shaken. Even driving along and you narrowly miss an accident, you sweat, you're scared, and that, gosh, that was a close shave. But can you imagine being under that pressure all the time?
Every day and multiple times a day.
And the sound. Some men quite genuinely suffered from very severe shell shock, and yet they didn't go near. They didn't even make it up the line. It was the sound.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the sound? And there's actually a history to that, in that if you can imagine this, that until the 1850s, let's say, broadly speaking, there weren't a lot of sounds. you had the clip clop of horses' hooves, you had horses and carts going up and down the street. You didn't have cars. The factories weren't as automated. And there's a theory that there was this assault of noise on the human psyche that really came to a head in the Great War with, if you can imagine the noise. It was phenomenal.
One of the things that strikes me as you talk, it's probably not just noise, as we think of noise, it's probably also whole new frequencies of sound.
It's
and
a percussion
whole new
injury.
Volumes of sound.
Yeah.
And when you think of the boom of bombs and what that could do to someone, it's fascinating to think about the neurology even of that.
But if you can imagine that, from the south coast of England, you could hear the battle in France.
That's amazing.
And I thought about that a lot on one of my trips to the Somme Valley. Actually standing at the very place where the poet Siegfried Sassoon stood to watch the opening salvos of the Battle of the Somme on July 1st, 1916. He was known as Mad Jack because he'd stand there in full view of the enemy without a helmet on and things like that. And he stood there to watch. And it wasn't that far away, and I stood in that very spot. But hunting season had just started in France. But what I noticed was the way in which, just a single sort of reverberation from a shotgun, from that guy over there, just reverberated around the whole valley. And then suddenly that guy over there was shooting his pheasant. And I thought, how might this have been? How must it have been with the intense cannonade that started, that came before each battle?
Wow.
Because that was the whole thing. The artillery tried to blow the heck out of each other before the guys went over the top and into battle. And it must have been just terrifying.
And it is one of the hallmarks of even our modern, PTSD is the sensitivity to sound.
My grandfather had intense sensitivity to sound.
And I have to say, for most people, probably their closest similar experience is a really bad car accident. Where
Absolutely.
There is, as you say, the squeal of tires and then the bam, and if they're okay, they get really shaky. And so lots of times an ambulance driver will be arguing with someone who's clearly very injured that they need to go to the hospital. People don't feel like they can trust their senses. They don't feel safe. They don't feel like they can relax around sounds. It's like everything is on overdrive for a very long time afterwards.
I think that's so true.
One of the other parallels I find fascinating in your book, Among the Mad, and today's experience is you mention in your book for your protagonist that there was tremendous pressure to limit the number of diagnoses of shell shock. That back then there were estimates of 50 to 60,000 men, and then now they estimate it was more like 200,000.
That's correct.
And for the first time, they're doing studies now, and they're estimating there are going to be 300,000 men who meet what are still pretty rigid diagnoses of PTSD coming back from Iraq. And that's 20% of the armed forces.
Exactly.
And when you consider that the armed forces has many layers of exposure to all kinds of threat or open conflict, that's a staggering number, 20%.
It's interesting to see some of the parallels. History, I think I said this to you before, James Joyce said, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to recover. I can remember writing a piece actually, and it was after one of my visits to the battlefields of the Somme and Ypres, and I thought, you know what, I think every politician should come here and explain yourselves.
Yeah.
Explain yourselves to the dead.
Yes.
Go to the Somme, go to Normandy, go to these, explain yourselves to the dead. Tell them why you're doing this.
Yes.
And it better be good. Because these men died for our freedom from war. And I know that sounds incredibly idealistic, but nothing can make you more deeply hurt than going to those places, truly. And reading, so-and-so, 16, so-and-so, 17, 18, 20, 22, and boys.
And that was one of Henry Allingham's most passionate statements, was that his war was supposed to end the wars.
Yes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.